I'm Trina Villanueva. I'm a corporate social responsibility officer at Union Bank. We've been members of the Bay Area Council since the 70s, and so we're very proud of that. And I have the honor of introducing Dr. Ken Rosen, chair of the Berkeley Haas Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics, and professor emeritus at Berkeley Haas. Go Bears. The economic news in recent weeks have been dizzying, to say the least. Inflation is at record high, and money is getting tighter, likely to get tighter. The stock market is jumping around. The economy is still adding jobs, but wage growth is down. In the Bay Area, our jobs recovery continues to lag other regions overall, but recent data indicates that tech jobs are up. Consumer sentiment is glum, but consumers are still spending. Meanwhile, GDP is shrinking. As if that's not enough, there's the prospect of a recession. And some companies are announcing hiring and spending freezes and even layoffs. Oh, yeah. There's also this pandemic that won't go away with new variants. It's affecting our ability to work. We've already had a panel on work and remote work. And we also have a continuing global supply chain issue. I told you want to get a stiff drink after this panel. So for now, to help us make sense of all of this, we've got one of California's leading economic minds. Dr. Ken Rosen is chair of the Berkeley Haas Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics, where he's been for more than 20 years. He's also the chair of the Rosen Consulting Group. He has authored hundreds of papers and 4 books on a wide range of economic topics. Top business leaders and corporations, including ourselves, regularly seek him out for his keen insights on what's happening in the economy and what might be around the corner. Please welcome Dr. Ken Rosen. So, Ken, the big question, are we headed for a recession? And if we are, what can we do about it?
Well, let me start by saying, how did we get to where we are today? First of all, we are not in recession right now. The economy has some mixed signals, but we're still growing pretty well. So we're not in recession now, even though the GDP numbers, the way they're calculated, may show technically 2 negative quarters, but it's really not true that we're not in recession now. It's not a broad pullback in the economy. So how did we get where we are today? Well, we got where we are today, which is the highest inflation in 40 years, 9.1% CPI, 11% PPI year over year. And that was caused by a number of things. The first big one that we all know about, of course, is COVID shutdown and reopening. And that caused the supply chain issues. And that probably accounts for maybe a third to half of the excess inflation we see. Remember, inflation was running 2%, 3% average for 40 years. So this is a big number. So part of it was the supply chain, and when you had Chairman Powell and at the time, President Biden and Janet Yellen, who many of you know is a brilliant Berkeley professor who was Secretary of Treasury, said this was temporary, they were thinking of the supply chain disruption that would eventually resolve itself. Unfortunately, it's taken a lot more time to resolve itself. COVID opening and reopening in China especially, but the war in Russia and Ukraine, which was unexpected, made that even worse. So I think that is half of it. The other half of it is really bad policy. And I'd start with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve basically did the right thing at the beginning of COVID, stuffed the system with money to stop a financial meltdown. And that was the right thing to do for maybe 3-4 months. But after that, they should have stopped doing it. So the balance sheet of the Fed went from $3.7 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. So they flooded the system with money, and that money, part of it was very helpful to keep people afloat, but the main thing that happened, it created a big speculative bubble. And we at the Bay Area have been very benefited by that. The tech sector, crypto, all of that, we had a huge bubble. And then finally, we had a fiscal policy, which was, again, the right thing to begin with, PPP loans, unemployment compensation, all the right thing for the first year. But then they continued to do this. So we added $7 trillion extra money to our national debt, and we really needed about $2.5 trillion. So we put way too much money in the system. Now, we weren't the only ones to do this. Much of Western Europe did similar things on monetary policy. Everyone did, printed huge amounts of money. They didn't have quite as extensive deficit policies. So at least half, maybe more, was bad policy. The Fed kept on denying it. Less than a year ago, last November, they still had not recognized this, despite many of us saying that they had made a mistake. In December, they started to change their tune. They didn't really change anything, though, until March. And really, it's just the last few months that they've started to affect things. And here's where the recession risk comes. They've moved interest rates from close to zero, short rates. They're now up substantially. They raised them 75 basis points in June. They're going to raise them next week, another 75 basis points, to try to get back to 2.5% rate, which would be neutral. But then they've told us they're going to go to 3.4 by year end this year and 3.8 by year end next year. That is still low by any historic comparison. Before COVID, the short rate was 2.5 to 3%. The long bond was 3%. So these are higher rates, but not dramatically higher. Some of you have been around a little while, and I've actually been at Berkeley 40 years, not 20 years. Remember those rates when we had 20% prime rate, 11%, 12% mortgage rate. So these are higher rates, but not high rates. So the question is, the tightening of monetary policy, they're reducing the balance sheet from $9 trillion, they're going to reduce it by $1.1 trillion a year. Money is going to get tighter. It's quantitative tightening. Interest rates are going to be higher. So does that mean we have to have a recession? I'd say the answer is no. But there are risks out there, and the main risk that we see, I have a slideshow, by the way, I'm looking at, but you're not seeing, naturally. Consumer confidence is at an all-time low. So that worries us. 70% of the economy is the consumer. Yet retail sales last month were up 1%. So the consumer feels bad. Why do they feel bad? Well, inflation makes everyone feel bad. So you see gasoline prices twice a week. You see food prices twice or more a week. Those are up dramatically. You see your rent. By the way, the federal government thinks rents nationwide are up 5% year over year. Guess what? They're up 15%. They think house prices, the owner equivalent rent, is up 5.2%. Well, we've had 2 years in a row of 15% house price increases nationwide. And now we have a mortgage rate that's gone from 3% to 5.5%. So people know that it's much worse, so they feel bad. 100% of the people are affected by inflation. Unemployment, if it goes from 4% to 10%, affects 10% of the people, maybe even 15%. So inflation has a much more negative effect on people's sentiment. So I think that's one element. The stock market, you mentioned that, and the stock market is down 20% on average, but many people's stocks in tech and biotech are down 40% or even more. The 10-year Treasury has a yield curve inversion. That is, the short rate's higher than the long rate. Historically, that has been a sign of potential recession. We've seen, again, some commodity prices which soared after the Ukraine invasion come back down to where they were before that. Oil, copper, wheat, gasoline, by the way, is down $1 per gallon in the last 4 weeks. So that means maybe it's not as bad as we think. But the brunt of this so far has been had by the single-family house sector. Sales are down about 14%. Prices have begun to erode. Mortgage applications are down. So I think right now the odds of an actual recession, first of all, we're not in one yet, but next year, later this year and next year, the odds are about, I think, 40% that we'll have a soft landing, a soft recession. But I have to add one more thing. The Fed's target for inflation is 2%. If we have the scenario I see, we'll see 5% inflation instead of 9%. If the Fed's not happy with 5%, and they may not be, they may raise interest rates even further. And that was in the newspaper this morning. They're thinking about that. Then we can get a hard landing and a much deeper recession. For the Bay Area, we are dependent on one major industry, which is tech. And tech has announced slowing of hiring or even some layoffs. We had excesses, we know that. Someone asked about crypto earlier. Total fraud. No question in my mind that this was a mistake. From $3 trillion of preservation of value. We've recovered, I think someone said that earlier, 88% of the jobs in the Bay Area, the least good performing economy in the country. But it's all in one sector, hospitality. If you look at the numbers, hospitality is the reason. We need tourism back, we need all that back. So the Bay Area is probably going to have a worse recession than the rest of the country because we're in an industry that had the biggest bubble and the biggest pullback.
And do you see a difference within the Bay Area, for example, San Francisco versus Silicon Valley?
I look at there are three big SMSAs in the Bay Area. Silicon Valley is doing best in terms of vacancy rates, job, and San Francisco, we all know, we've heard it earlier today, we have a problem. And we need to get the politics right, the housing issues right. So San Francisco has the lowest percentage of people going to their offices of any place in the country. Shocking. I was in New York last week. People are in their offices. They are not in San Francisco yet. Our own little office in Berkeley, I have 14 people. I want everyone back in the office. So on Monday, I had 3. Yesterday, I had 5. I'm not there today. Guess how many people are there today? 1. So this is a real problem. We heard this from the earlier panel. We need this for the vitality of San Francisco, and I think that that's critical. So the Bay Area is going to suffer worse. The migration to Sun Belt locations and mountain states is not going to reverse. It's housing costs, it's taxes, it's quality of life, commute, all of these type of things. I'm afraid that's not going to reverse.
Just actually, show of hands from the employers. How many of you guys are requiring your folks to go back to the office? At least 3 times a week? So I have a colleague who works for a different financial institution. They are actually checking badge swipes to see if people are coming back. So, and I know why, but I'm just curious how you guys, feel about like forcing people to go back to work. I should have asked that question at the other panel this morning, or this afternoon. So along those lines, do you have a sense of what will happen to our commercial office space? And if you don't think people are going to come back to work, what might happen to our empty buildings?
So first of all, I have a theme, working on a paper called Better Together. You're more productive together. There is no question that we're going to have a hybrid model, or remote work will be part of it all. But I think productivity-wise, for many, many white-collar jobs, it's better together. And the reasons are mentoring, casual interactions, creativity. So I think the office buildings, when people come back, they're going to want office space, and they're going to demand that office space. As Mike Coverby said earlier, 3 years ago, we were the center of the universe. The office vacancy rate was below 5%. So I'm an optimist that people will come back to the office, will be working at the office. They may not be in 5 days a week, but it's really hard to cut your office footprint if, say, people are coming in 3 days a week. Very hard to cut your footprint, your demand. We have seen a number of tech companies put space on the market, sublet space in San Francisco, and some said they're going to go remote forever. But I think in the end, people will be working in office again, but it might take longer than we think. Some of my colleagues have talked about a big, deep recession will make people realize they don't get the job if they're not in the office. And those laid off will be those who aren't visible. So I think a recession might help more people go back eventually. So I'm a believer in the office, and I think it's just more productive. But it won't be the same as it was before, that's for sure. And the vitality of our urban core really depends on that. If we have 20% vacancy, which we have roughly now, and people in the office 30%, 35%, it's very hard to have a viable set of ecostructures around that.
Certainly, and I've seen the impact on small business, especially those mom and pops near the financial district in downtown Oakland as well. So I think hopefully folks will want to go back to work.
Well,
at least part of the
Elon
time.
Musk, who was, I know, Kira's favorite person earlier, said, if you don't want to come back to the office, go pretend to work someplace else. But there's a little bit of truth to this. It really is true. I've interviewed all of our 14 people and found out that the reasons people don't want to come back. The biggest one is the commute. I spend an hour each day. Why should I waste the time? I can give you that time. Sure, we believe that. And I have good people. I know that, but the young people, they're not learning from us by Zoom. It's very tough to have that work. And so I'm trying my best. We had a lunch with champagne. That worked. We had 10 out of 14 people came.
So maybe one outcome of this summit today is to think about creative ways to get your folks to come back to the office. So actually, you've answered, I think you read my questions ahead of time because you answered them already. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to ask to see if you're okay with this, Dr. Rosen, to have people ask you a couple of questions.
I have a couple of things I think would be interesting to people. One of the big things that we don't realize is that international immigration has plunged during the last administration. We have roughly 1 million legal immigrants coming to the country a year. Under the last administration, by the last year, they cut it to 200,000. Our major cities like San Francisco, LA, New York, Washington, have always been refilled by the international immigration. And that basically stopped COVID part of it as well. And so we have domestic outmigration. It's been going on before COVID, accelerated during COVID, but we need that international immigration. We have 1.1 million people who've applied for visas. They can't process them because the people aren't in their office. Guess what? In Washington. So we need the international immigration. It counts for 45% of all population growth, but for cities, it's 70% of population growth, so that's one big thing. The other is the Millennial Generation. The Millennial Generation postponed getting married by 7 years, having children, and now they're getting in their 30s, and as they, I think, decide to have a lifestyle maybe somewhat like their parents, I think we're going to see a lot of demand. And so I think one of the reasons the housing market has gone crazy upward is we had a record level of household formations, that people are finally doing things that they postponed. We don't have the data yet to show that because the data is so lagged. But I think that's going to be one of the explanations why we had such a big surge of demand. And supply is inelastic, especially inelastic in the Bay Area. But nationwide, this house price increase happened. Matter of fact, house prices went up more in Austin, Texas, in Phoenix, in Las Vegas than they did here. And it's migration out and the huge household formation. So there's some demographics going on. And I think we have a paradigm shift. Because of the aging population, the ratio of retirees to workers is rising dramatically, the baby boom generation retiring. So if we don't have international immigration, the shortage of labor that we see now is going to continue and be a big problem here in Western Europe. It already is in Japan and China. So demographics move slowly, but I think they're moving in a direction that we can do something about it. And a legalization of people who are already here, a guest worker program, green cards for every person who attends American university. We've got to realize that it is demographic population growth that is missing that we need.
As someone who came here when she was 12, I can definitely relate to that. So we have a few more minutes. I'd like to see if we can get 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Yeah, so I think the first set of things, PPP, unemployment, they were all critical. That first year we needed them. But it's absolutely true that last $1.9 trillion, and Larry Summers, who's a Democratic economist, others warned that we didn't have a big GDP gap any longer. But we needed to stop the virus and get the reopening, and that's what was happening. So it was pretty sure that this was going to be inflationary. Again, people didn't want to hear it because they were looking backward. And by the way, we still have a big risk. I'm so excited to see everyone in mask, most everyone in masks. I've had my mask on till speaking. That isn't true for most of the conferences. You go outside of this area, people, I mean, I'm shocked. I did a big speech in Texas. I wore a mask. No one in the room was wearing a mask. So I think we could have another surge in the virus. Would we shut things down again? I don't know. But that's another big risk out there. But I do think that these stimulus programs are meant to solve a short-term problem. But long run, keeping money too cheap for so long, it does create bubbles in asset values, which I think has spilled over to the economy, created a bubble, and now we're paying the price of it. And the Fed always has been somewhat backward-looking. So now it's almost as if these people have had a body snatcher take them over. They're so aggressive at raising rates. We haven't raised rates 75 basis points in a long time, and we've done it twice in a row. We're going to do the next one, and I'm afraid they might overreact. But the question is going to be if and when the economy does have a recession this next time, will they act aggressively again, or are they going to keep on fighting inflation? And I don't know the answer. That's going to be the big question: do we have a soft landing or a hard landing?
I think we have time for one more. Unless, Jim, you want to ask
I've got one over here.
Okay.
I was going to ask one more question, which, so you advise real estate investors. So there's a lot of folks here who either are real estate investors or who would like to be. At this stage, in California or nationally, where would you, given the cycle, where would you advise people to invest? What aspects of real estate?
If you think of the major food groups in real estate, the one category everyone wants to put money in still is apartments. We've seen rents grow dramatically. Vacancy rates are at a 50-year low nationally. Rent growth of 15%. We've never seen that nationally in 1 year. So apartments are the number one place people still want to be. The other is warehouses. Because of the e-commerce effect, the desire to have resilient supply chains rather than just in time, but just in case supply chains. We have a record low vacancy rate in industrial, and rents have also gone up dramatically there. So those are the two product types people want to be. The other is life science. You cannot get people to invest in office. You can't get people to lend on office because they're looking at the short-term situation. But there's a bifurcation. The best office buildings are actually doing very well. And office buildings, generally, people are paying their rent. They're just not in them yet, but they're paying their rent. So office is the one area that people are reluctant to put money in. Also, retail, we think retail's rebounded pretty nicely. People want to be out. They want to go to restaurants. They want to shop. And so e-commerce has actually slowed down, and retail's coming back. There is, and I think we heard that earlier panel, CBDs generally are not the places people want to put money. They want to be in the Sun Belt. They want to be in mountain states. I had to step out. I couldn't hear one of the other panels. The leading real estate company is one of our clients. And I said, well, he was talking about San Francisco. I said, that's where I am now. And they said, would you put more money in San Francisco? He said, no, he's from New York. So we have that bad press. But I think someone was very right. Curious that it's been like that in the Tenderloin for a long time. So we just have to change that, seed some stories, go to New York with some good news.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I started the job, we were right at the heel of the dot-com bust. And so we lost 400,000 jobs in a couple of years. There was nothing but bad news here, for different reasons, same kind of story. But it was actually exciting to take the job at that point where we were kind of in fighting mode. We needed to show the rest of the state and the country, that we could rebound, and we sure as heck did. And I think we really showed them. And now, we're into another cycle where, the doubt is cast, and people are looking askance at the region and saying, Silicon Valley is behind us, and remote work is going to kill us, and all these kinds of things. Well, these are headwinds, but we've got, I would say, as I started today, we have assets in the Bay Area nobody else has. We can, if we feel like it, we can compete unfairly, because we have things you just can't compete with. And so I strongly suspect we will be back. I think if we're smart, it won't take too long. If we're hesitant and we're not creative, then it could be a while. But I don't think you can keep a place like this down. I just want to thank Trina. Trina was actually sort of an employee of the Bay Area Council before I started with the Smart Growth Real Estate Fund, which was a triple bottom line fund, a real
That's a long time
innovation.
ago.
That's a long time ago. And Ken, you're amazing, and I think really one of the most insightful people in talking about the overall economy. Not just real estate, but the overall situation. And you don't pull any punches. You tell it like it is. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.